I'm glad to be here today, and I want to thank Professor McTavish, which I don't think I've ever put Professor and McTavish together. We've known each other for so long. But you all are very blessed to have him as a professor. He's one of the best entrepreneurs that I know, and we've known each other for a very long time, so you can learn a lot from him if you haven't already. So how many of you in here want to potentially be this thing called an entrepreneur, have your own business? You're not going to raise those hands with gusto, just kind of like that? Well, you know, I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. That's what we discussed around the dinner table at night. My family started a campground, hunting preserve, and riding stable in upstate New York. And when I was young, they sold it off, and they carried back the paper. And they got a check in the mail every month. It wasn't a big check, but it was a check. And I grew up on the western slope of Colorado, little town of Olathe. Anyone been to Olathe, Colorado? Anyone from the western slope? Anyone heard of the western slope? Okay, good. We at least heard of the western slope. Okay. Well, Olathe is the kind of town that if you drove through it and you blinked, you would miss it. It's known for its sweet corn, and that's about it. And in growing up in a family of entrepreneurs, my dad was in construction, and it really resonated with me, this idea of going out and creating something, to create value, and to not have a ceiling, but also not to have a floor. And some people love the idea of having their own company. They love the idea of being an entrepreneur. But sometimes when the rubber meets the road, it's really a challenge, specifically not having that floor. And when I say a floor, I mean a regular paycheck that's showing up every 2 weeks. You see, as an entrepreneur, oftentimes you're making sure that everyone else is paid and that you may not get paid. Your employees come before you do. And that's a struggle for a lot of people. But I grew up on the western slope, went to school up at CU Boulder, and that was an interesting experience from a young kid on the western slope to go up to. My stepfather, who had adopted me, died on the floor in front of me when he was 39 years of age and I was 16. And I was just going through my high school years. And it was a very challenging time to go through that. And I was struggling with my faith at that time. You see, my father was a deacon in the church, and we were finally a happy family together and exploring faith and growing our faith. And the Lord took away my father, and I had to become the man of the house. We had just adopted my sister from Korea, just had a baby, my mom, at 42 years of age in November, and he died in January on the floor in front of me from an asthma attack. So I went to CU Boulder and was put into the university of everything that CU is, the cauldron of it all, and really struggled with my faith. And from that process, by the time I graduated, I was teaching apologetics courses to my fellow CU students. And this idea of realizing that my faith was my own and to make it something that was central and part of my life. I became a broker with Cushman & Wakefield of Colorado, representing landlords and tenants. And that environment of having to go out and hunt and kill to eat was a very good environment for a young person to grow up in. It teaches you a lot of valuable lessons when you're forced to go out there and produce. But I always wanted to have my own company. And so 16 years ago, I founded North Star Commercial Partners. And the focus of North Star was to go buy the excess non-strategic real estate from corporate America, the assets they no longer wanted or needed. And since then, we've bought assets all throughout the country. But a pivotal change for me as an entrepreneur and having my own company was reading a book called Halftime by Bob Buford. Any of you read that book at all? Thank you, Professor McTavish. I highly recommend that you all buy the book Halftime. And if you don't have the money to buy it, I'd be happy to buy it for you and encourage you to read it. It's a book that talks about what are you going to do with the halftime of your life. You see, most people in the beginning of their life, especially when they're younger, focus on this thing called success. And usually it's defined as worldly success. You have an idea of a certain company you want to work for, maybe a certain title you want to have, a certain area you want to live. Whatever it might be for you. Think about what success right now is for you. Maybe it's just getting through this class this morning. Maybe that's success. But what is that success and how you want to architect your life? And see, I believe that most people in life, sadly, are more reactive than proactive. I encourage each and every one of you to be an architect of your life. Be proactive. Stuff is always going to happen to you. The question is, what are you going to do with it, and what are your long-term goals? But this book, Halftime, talks about that after you're focused on this thing called success, and you go into the halftime, the locker room, what do you want the rest of your life to be? And the book encourages you to make this transition from success to significance. And significance has a different meaning and a different impact. It's this idea of legacy. It's this idea of benefiting humanity. Something that lasts beyond you and your life. And see, you all in this room today may say, that's great, Mr. Watson. You look like you're in the fourth quarter with a few seconds left on the clock. But I might be in the second, or I might be in the first quarter. But here's what I challenge you. You don't know where you are right now in the game of life. You see, my father went away healthy at 39 years of age, which may seem old to you. I know to my kids it seems old. I'm in my early 40s. But he went away healthy that morning and came home that night and died on the floor in front of me. None of us in this room know whether we're in the second, third, or fourth quarter. And so I encourage you to appreciate life and to really think about, what do you want your significance to be? What does that look like for you? What do you want people to think about when they think of you and why you lived and breathed on this planet? You each have a sphere of influence, and the question is, what will you do with it? So, how that affected North Star is that we decided to start connecting our passions with our profession. And if you connect your passions with your profession, I'll submit to each of you that you'll never work another day in your life. You'll be going after what you love. Work is such an integral part of your life. You're going to spend a few hours doing it unless you're independently wealthy or going to inherit a bunch of money. But even so, we were created to create. So figure out what your passions are and try to turn that into your profession. You know, sadly in America, we've gotten to the point where we go to college to get a degree to go ahead and get a job that we want, and whatever that looks like for us. You know, my passion, for instance, back when I went to college, was English. I saw my sister graduate with an English lit major, and she couldn't get a job. So I said, you know what? I'll become a business major, and all my electives will be focused around English and the study of it. But it's sad, in a way, you think about it, that I never really went after my passion back then. I went with something that was practical, that I could use in the workforce. So connect your passions with your profession wherever you can. And so at North Star, we said, you know what? Yes, we've been buying these vacant buildings, but why? See, our specialty is going in and buying vacant buildings and putting them into productivity. So the big shift that we made is to say, you know what? Our passions are creating jobs and opportunity and empowering people. I love people, and I love to see people blossom, of all different kinds of people that are out there. And I think as Christians in the world, we should be known for our love and our service first and foremost, not our judgment. Sadly, if we go out on the street corner today and we ask most people, what do you think about Christians? What do you think they'll say? They'll tell you more of what we're against than what we're for. And I want to be known for my love and my service. Because to me, that is a life well lived. And I think that is what Jesus calls us to do as well. So we go out and we buy these vacant buildings all around America to create jobs and opportunity and empower people. We're fortunate in owning assets in 17 states, about $1 billion of value right now. And we also have the opportunity, in addition to going into these inner city communities and taking these buildings and repositioning them, we said, you know what is one of our other passions? And that's education reform and excellence in America. So we created the Education Opportunity Fund. And that fund goes out and buys vacant office, industrial, and retail buildings, mostly in economically challenged inner city neighborhoods. And it buys those buildings for charter schools so that people in those communities can have choice, can have competition, to send their kids where they will thrive to the best of their ability. You see, the wealthy in our country, they already have choice. They can move to the school district of their choice and send their kids to whatever that best school is, or they can afford private school. Everybody else is caught in our current system. To give you an example, we just bought a building last year out at Peoria and I-70 in the Montbello neighborhood. You know where that is? Been out there towards the airport? Sadly, every public school in the near vicinity of this particular building that we bought has an F rating. I didn't give them that rating. That's just what they have. So if you live in this particular zip code and your only choice is to send your kid into an environment where 40 to 60% of the kids never graduate, what do you think the stats are for your kid, what it might be? Stacked against them, right? And so we went and bought a vacant building for a charter school called Academy 360. Looks at a 360-degree view of a child's life, provides food for them for breakfast in the morning when they come in, and works on their health and their education, etc. And so we bought that building for them, and now that school is thriving and affecting many kids. Most of the kids in that school will be the first graduates from high school in their family, let alone going on to college. So being an entrepreneur, we've brought in other things, like Young Americans Bank, etc., to teach them about financial literacy, to teach them about entrepreneurship, to encourage them that they could go out and start their own company if they wanted to. So it's just one way that we say, you know what? We just happen to be working on a real estate platform, but how can we make a positive difference in this world? So that's what North Star does. That's what we focus on in building those relationships. Tim had asked about the Opportunity Coalition. A number of years ago, I ran for public office. It was a fascinating experience, and it was the top contested race in the state, and it was, let's just say, a little bit bloody running for public office. But when I went through that process, I realized that our state was disconnected. I came from the Western Slope, and how many people in here know someone on the Western Slope is a real good friendship? Okay, anyone else? And then you had the mountain region, and then you had the Front Range, and then you had the Eastern Plains. And then people were not connected when it came to things like whether you were in business or academia, law, politics, etc. It's very diverse and disconnected. So I founded the Opportunity Coalition, and the purpose of the Opportunity Coalition is to build bridges and connection among diverse people. It's nonpartisan. We bring in a speaker per month, and we do it down at the Innovation Pavilion. That's a building that I bought from a lender that has a business incubator in it. The youngest entrepreneur there is in 5th grade. The oldest is in his 80s, and everything in between. And over 80 companies have been founded in this business incubator in the last couple of years. So if you have an idea as an entrepreneur, any of you could go there today, hang out in their coffee shop for free, meet other entrepreneurs. As you get your idea going, you can rent a cubicle or an office and then grow within the building. So we bought that building. I don't own the business operations, but I bought that building because I believe in entrepreneurship and trying to help entrepreneurs in any way that we can. So the third Thursday of the month, we host an event there, and all of you, because of Professor McTavish, are welcome as my personal guest at no cost. I do that with the President's Leadership class up at CU that I was a part of, and each time we have different college students come down, and I connect them in the room. But we bring in a speaker, so this coming month we have State Treasurer Walker Stapleton. And then we have a guy who is head of all of the military and things that were being developed in the state. We have Jim Nicholson, who is Secretary of the Veterans Administration and was an ambassador to the Vatican, and a host of other people that come in each month. And we do a little round table with about 10 people, and then we go into the main room, and 100 to 200 people show up. And the speaker gets up and shares their golden nuggets of wisdom. And they're nuggets that you can learn from. And if you go to the Opportunity Coalition website, we do little 1 to 2 minute video snippets of every single speaker. And so it's a wealth of knowledge for you to go ahead and access those videos. But I encourage you to come down And I'll introduce you to 3, 5, 10 people in the room, and you can just begin to learn from them and to get exposed to different people. Already new companies have been founded, new initiatives, new employees, etc. It's a pretty powerful, powerful experience. And we've got a great lineup of speakers for the rest of the year. So I encourage you to come down and look at that. Through the experience of the Innovation Pavilion, we were fortunate to meet members of the African community. I don't know if you know or not, but in and around downtown Denver, there's about 500,000 people from Africa who have come to America in search of the great American dream. These are people that left everything behind, their family, their relationships, their comfort zone, to come to America in search of opportunity. And for 7 years, these people had been going out and wanted a center for themselves, a cultural center, an event center, a place where they could promote entrepreneurship. And so when we bought the Innovation Pavilion, we were fortunate to meet them. And I went out and bought a building for them on East Colfax, a vacant building. And I encourage you to go down and look at that building. It's called Afric Mall. It's with a K, Afric Mall. And when you go into this building now, there's a food court where you can try food from all different places throughout Africa. The Ivory Coast, Ghana, South Africa, Ethiopian food, which is one of my weaknesses in the world. I mean, I just love Ethiopian food. But it's neat to go into that food court and try food from different cultures. They have a cultural center where you can learn about Africa. They have a grocery store where they can get some of the spices and different things that they can't find at King Soopers on a given day. They have an event center. You see, in the African community, unlike America where we have a wedding in 1 hour slot between 10 and 11 and then the next wedding or whatever it might be, they want to celebrate for a day, for 2 days. Same thing if there's a funeral. This is part of their culture. And so there's an event center up there where they can go and also bring their food. And then we have a business incubator as well. And so, again, we just happen to be real estate people. But if you can go in and create those opportunities for others, it's very, very powerful. Tim wanted me to talk a little bit about competition. I love competition. Competition makes all of us better. And when you have certain things where all of a sudden competition is looked at as a negative, or we have a government that tries to thwart competition in certain arenas, it really breaks my heart, because competition makes us better as individuals, makes society better, makes products better, etc. So we love competition. And at North Star, we're trying to build a world-class organization right here in Denver that's competing head-to-head with people in New York and LA and London and all of those other places. You see, we have the brain trust in this room. We have the capability. The question is, are we willing to go out and make great things happen together? I also have had the opportunity to go through my work and travel the world, specifically spending a lot of time in the Middle East lately. And it's been absolutely fascinating. We were just talking beforehand how in the Middle East it's been really interesting in doing business on that level. They want to talk first and foremost about family, about faith, about politics, the very subjects that are taboo to discuss in many respects in many meetings that we may have in the United States. And I've been in business meetings talking about huge deals, and 95% of the conversation is on those 3 points. And 5% is about this thing called business after those first 3. And if they like you and respect you, and you have a spine on the first 3, they may not agree with you, but they appreciate if you're informed and willing to have the conversation. Then going to the final one on the 5% of business goes lightning fast. And I will also encourage you to travel the world wherever you can. There's a stat that less than 10% of Americans hold a passport, and yet we're making decisions about world affairs. I have had conversations about Jesus more at a Muslim table, 100-fold more, than I ever have at a table here with a Christian family in Denver, Colorado. A friend of mine, Carl Medeiros, he's a writer. He wrote a book called Tea with Hezbollah. And he came and spoke at our church. And he is now living in Dubai part of the year and working for me and building relationships throughout the region. And it is absolutely fascinating to see, I think, the Reformation that is potentially going on, focusing on this figure of Jesus. Jesus is mentioned 54 times in the Quran. Prophet Muhammad, 4 times. I encourage, as I go out and talk to people, one of the best things you could do for societal change is go befriend somebody different than yourself. Befriend the Muslim, befriend the Jew, befriend the Christian, befriend the non-believer, and build true relationships with them. And when you do so, some pretty powerful and amazing things happen. Lord knows I don't have all the answers. I'm just sharing with you a few things that I have found to be very beneficial as we go out and deploy on that level, specifically as an entrepreneur, and to realize that each one of us has talents and contributions to provide in this world. So with that, I'll open up for questions, comments. Yes?
I'm curious as to how you deal with the unknown, because in the many things that you're doing as an entrepreneur, you have to deal with things that you don't know or are literate in.
Yep.
And I think it's based upon the attitude we have towards the unknown, concept of your life.
Yep.
I'm curious how you take the unknown.
You bet. So I embrace the unknown. A lot of people fear it, and it becomes such a fear that they can't act at all. Going back to what I said about being reactive versus proactive. If you decide not to act, you've made the decision, right? You've stopped to have that motion go in force. So what I try to do is to become as educated as I can, but to realize that I'm not an expert. So in owning a company and employing a lot of people, I surround myself with as many smart people as I can in good partnerships. And my goal is to empower and to encourage and then set the strategy based on the input and information from all those individuals. And to realize that, one of the quotes I keep in my binder, I keep a couple of quotes. And I'm a big quote freak and working through therapy on that and things like that. But one of the quotes I got when I was in high school is that success is not final and failure is not fatal. So just think about that for a second. The moment you think that you've attained this thing called success and you know it all and those type of things is the moment that you will begin to atrophy and to fail. But also to realize that failure is not fatal. In fact, some of the greatest lessons I have ever learned are in this thing called failure, that the world would say, go crawl away in that corner based on what you just went through. In 2008, it was the worst economy since the Great Depression. 99.9% of my wealth was in real estate, and it dropped by 80% or more in value. My wife and I, we lost all of our net worth, all of it. And we were writing out significant checks per month to pay all of our employees to keep things afloat. And we had no income coming in, and we weren't getting a check. And you try to go down the runway on that, and you're trying to pull on that lever to get that plane to take off the runway and do that for 18 months. It was extremely painful. But it was one of the best things that I've ever experienced in my life, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. Because it teaches you your true mettle and what really matters. What matters is your relationship with the Lord. What matters is your relationship with your family. What matters is your relationship to the community. And you really can tell who your friends are during those times, right? When things are good, everybody loves you, right? And everybody wants to be your friend. It's when things are bad that it really comes. And to me, those relationships that stayed with us through that time are relationships that I would not trade for anything. So I would encourage you to embrace those obstacles, to be knowledgeable, and to realize that every day you're going to come to these paths where you're going to have to make decisions, and that failure is not problematic. And the unknown, the deeper you go, the more light will be shown on that path to make, the right decision. So a very long answer to a short question, but it was a good question. Yes?
So you purchase these buildings and then you let the businesses do it. Do the businesses on themselves, or how do you work with the people? Do you just continue going by real estate, or how does that work?
You bet. So great question. So we buy two groups of properties. So 80% of what we buy is completely vacant real estate. So we're buying real estate with good bones in good locations. And we have built a matrix over the years of certain cities we like to be in, et cetera. But we buy office, industrial, and retail properties. We immediately bring in contractors to improve them, new carpet, new paint, get them so where they look and present well. And then we market them to secure tenants to locate in them. And so sometimes a tenant will come in and want to buy it. Other times they just become our tenant and we build it out to their specifications. But we try to get it in a vanilla box, shall we say, that removes a lot of the hair. So one of the things, for instance, that we buy a lot of are environmentally impacted assets. Again, I love buying assets, the diamonds in the rough that people have overlooked and that we can put back into productivity. And so we'll buy those, remove the asbestos, remove whatever it is, get it cleaned up, and so it can be leased by a tenant. The other 20% of what we buy is through our corporate and strategic partnership relationships. So as companies are buying and selling each other, we'll come in and buy the real estate. So as an example, out here on Wadsworth, I saw a Grease Monkey. So the CEO of Grease Monkey used to be the CEO of Big O Tires, has invested with me personally for many years. He retired from Big O Tires and put together a private equity group and bought Grease Monkey. So they have 300 locations nationally. So as they're growing their corporate footprint, we buy or build every single facility for them, as one example on the corporate side. We're also doing a lot of senior care and assisted care facilities, et cetera. So it really depends. Sometimes we'll have a tenant in tow on that 20% side, but 80% of the time we don't have a tenant. We just know that it's good value, and we're buying those assets at sub 30 or 40% of their replacement cost value. Which, are any of you interested in real estate, commercial real estate at all? Yeah. So, which sounds kind of, reasonable, but it's anathema in the marketplace. I mean, we're very different compared to all the competition. Most competition, they believe, go buy a leased building and have income. I believe you make your money on the buy, and that it's less risky to buy a completely vacant building for pennies on the dollar than a fully leased building at a much higher price. Because if that income stream leaves that building, you're left with one thing, a high basis in a building. If you buy at a low basis, now I can be more flexible, right? I can cut a better deal, I can be more patient, I can find an alternative use, a host of other things. But in the real estate world, you'd be surprised, and we go round and round all the time. But we've got a great little niche for ourselves, and that's what we do. And again, you then overlay on that the passion side of it, and it's just a lot of fun. Anyone else? Yes? Yeah.
Besides 2008, did you ever think you would fail?
It's funny. As I said, I always wanted to have my own company. And so when I was a broker at Cushman & Wakefield, I'd saved up enough money to live for a year. And I came home to my wife and I said, honey, I'd like to take a step backward for a giant leap forward and to pursue this thing called being an entrepreneur. And it was very risky at the time. Started in 400 square feet above Ted's Montana Grill on Larimer Square. I don't know if you know where that is down there on 14th and Larimer. Signed my first lease. And I told my wife, I said, you know what, we'll save a few $100 in the checking account, that if worse comes to worse and I fail, that we can go down to Mexico and hang out for a few weeks, have a few margaritas, and then come back and could always be a broker again. And so, we started that, and my wife was extremely supportive. She's an attorney by trade, and she does a lot of the legal work for our firm and now does a lot of the construction. And there were challenging times where, again, we're trying to buy multi-million-dollar deals, and I didn't come from a family of money. I came from a family that taught me about blessings and hard work in that order. And so we had to pull it all together and try to bring the capital together and bring the lender together. As an example, the first large deal I did, I went into the Benjamin Moore Paint Company. I don't know if you know where the Benjamin Moore paint lofts are down by Coors Field. There's a big sign that says Benjamin Moore Paints. Anyway, I ended up buying all their excess real estate coast to coast in America in 5 different cities. And I was 20-something years of age, and I went back to Montvale, New Jersey, and there were 12 people on their side of the table, the CEO to the CFO, legal counsel, et cetera. And somehow I talked them into letting me buy all their excess real estate around the country. But it was like the dog barking after the car. If it ever caught it, what would it do with it? Well, my teeth were in the bumper of that car, and I was going to be drug around. And so it was a very challenging time. But was fortunate and blessed to be able to put the deal together, and investors got a huge return, and that put the wind in our sails. But no, in terms of the one period that was probably the most challenging was 2008. And you have to realize, and I don't remember, some of you remember, but at the time there were newspaper articles that said, is capitalism the model that America should continue to pursue? I didn't know that was up for discussion, but it was at the time, and banks were falling. I mean, it was a bloody, bloody time. There were a lot of real estate people that literally and figuratively jumped off of garages and took their own lives. It was heartbreaking. All that value, all that wealth creation, and it was just totally taken away from them. Not for anything that they did. It's just the market and what happened. So it was a challenging time, but no, that would probably be the main and only one. But, it also hasn't been easy trying to pull the ends together and fund it all and be responsible for all the employees. We've got about 37 employees right now, and you're responsible for those people's mortgages and for those people to send their kids to school, et cetera. So it's not something you take lightly at the end of the day. Anyone else? Yes.
What kind of inspired you to create this unique niche in the market of, wanting to provide opportunity for people that are, underprivileged?
Yeah.
Yeah, could you kind of touch on, what kind of enlightened that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I've been blessed to be able to travel a good part of the world. And when I was in college, I went on a program called Semester at Sea. I don't know if they offer that here or not, but I was a poor work-study student on Semester at Sea and got to go around the world for that. It's a big cruise ship and goes around the world, and all college students. And so I got to go to India. And have any of you been to India before? Yeah. I recommend highly you go to India. It'll take your world concept and turn it upside down and kick it down the road a little bit. And I got to see the caste system in person. And it actually will bring tears to my eye if I talk too much about it, but it literally broke my heart. This idea that no matter what you do in life, you'll be forever in a certain caste, no matter how good you do something. I watched a woman for part of a day, and she walked barefoot among the cattle. And as they defecated, she had what looked like a painter's palette. And she would scoop up the feces, and she'd walk over to a kiln. And she'd take those feces, and she'd form it into a patty, and she'd dry them. Then she'd take those dried patties, and she'd stack them, because they use them for fuel. And no matter how well she formed those patties, no matter how quickly she worked, no matter how well she made those piles in a perfect form, she would do that the rest of her days. Because she was born into a certain caste, because humanity said that she has to be in that caste. And as I said, it literally broke my heart. And I said, you know what? No matter where you come from, no matter who you are, you should have an opportunity. And that really went on my spiritual path and journey. And to realize that this room right here and where you live, though you may have your own individual challenges, you have won the historical lottery of all time to live when and where and how you do in the United States of America. We are not perfect. We have our issues. But I've traveled a good part of the world, and this right here is not reality for a good part of the world. You live better than kings and queens of antiquity. You do. May not feel like it, but you do. And with that, I think, comes a certain social responsibility as well, not only to help people in our own country for that opportunity and access, but I think globally as well. And I think there's just so much potential out there, and if I could be used as a vessel to go out and impact one life for the better, so be it. My parents told me when I was young, they said, Brian, you'll be a blessed man if you can go out and impact one life for the better. If you're given the opportunity to impact hundreds or thousands or millions, so be it. But focus on the one. So that's what we do. We focus on the one. And it's been a real blessing. And it'll be interesting to see where that comes and how that develops. Yes?
What mentors, if any, I think you mentioned your parents too,
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurial mindset, but what mentors did you have that kind of brought you to where you are today, and what was the value of that, if there were?
So I'm actually, I just wrote a book, and it's being edited right now and hopefully be published soon. And there's a section in there called Mentors, because I think it's sad in the world we live in today, we don't have many mentors, right? Because when I was younger, for instance, one of my mentors that I believed in, one of my heroes was JFK. loved that he was, such a great speaker and challenged us to get to the moon and all these wonderful things. And then I read this book called The Dark Side of Camelot, and it talked about how he was bankrupt morally on a personal level with all the affairs and women and all the stuff that he had going on in his life. And so I wanted just to throw JFK out, right? Because if he couldn't be perfect in all respects, then he couldn't be a mentor at all. And what I came to learn in my personal journey is I believe there are two things you can meet from every single person you meet in life, whether it be the janitor, the ditch digger, the CEO, or anyone in between. And I always try to treat people equally. And the two things that I believe you can learn from every single person is what you want to emulate in your own life and what you want to avoid. And sometimes, some people, you learn more about what you want to avoid than emulate, right? And so on that journey, I said, you know what, I'm going to have these different mentors or heroes and appreciate a specific thing or things about them, but I don't necessarily have to throw them out wholesale because there are things that disappoint me about them. Because you know what? They're human. And you know what? I'm human. And so some of my heroes, obviously Jesus and his leadership and the impact in the world, JFK, Lincoln, and for what he did, in terms of diversity. I mean, in terms of a very difficult time to try to appreciate diversity and to develop that. And, there's a host of others that I have. And in that book, I came up with 100 different people for different reasons over the history. I will leave you with one of my greatest heroes, though, two of them. One is William Wilberforce and what he did to help end slavery. And the other one is Ernest Shackleton. And if you haven't know much about him and what he did in terms of leadership to get his people out of a very difficult time, those are two of probably my top 10 at the end of the day. Anyone else? Yes?
What would you recommend to someone who's interested in commercial real estate and go somewhere along those lines?
Well, I'd be happy to be a resource for you at any time. So feel free to call me, and we take internships and different things from time to let people get exposed to it. It's a phenomenal business. Absolutely love it. It is highly competitive. I will tell you that. I'll give you an example. In Colorado, there's about 25,000 residential real estate agents, and there's about 700 commercial agents. And the old, 90-10 rule, I would say, is about a 95-5 or a 98-2 rule in commercial real estate. Everyone, at least in the brokerage world, et cetera, all have a college degree, and it's highly professional, highly competitive. And so figure out what you want to do. For me, I always wanted to be an owner. So I decided to become a broker so I could learn the transaction, momentum of a deal, et cetera, stand on my own 2 feet because it's 100% commission-based. And about 85% of my work was landlord representation. I was just a sponge around them, with the largest landlords in the world to the small entrepreneur, just to figure out what they did and what I would do differently. The other 15% was tenant representation, so I got to see how corporations viewed real estate. But I always had the end goal in mind of becoming an owner. When I first started, it was kind of a funny story. It was a very difficult time trying to get a job. They weren't hiring at all. And I wanted to work for this firm called Cushman & Wakefield. And I kept calling them and calling them and calling them, and I kept getting no, not interested. So finally, on a Friday, I said, you know what? I said, I'm going to come down there on Monday morning, and you don't have to pay me. And if you can give me a desk, that's great. All I really need is a phone, and I just want to come to work for you. And so they, I think, finally just said, look, if this guy's that crazy, let's go ahead and bring him in. So I went down there, but I learned later that they appreciated it because in that business, you had to cold call and be willing to go out on the limb and to try to take a little bit of a risk, and they appreciated that and finally let me come in and work. So figure out what you want to do. There's so many aspects. There's property management, construction management, ownership, brokerage, et cetera. And then you can start to go down the path to develop your career. But it is a lot of fun. Absolutely love it. Anyone else? Yes?
Besides Halftime, what are some other books that you would recommend?
Oh, there are so many good books. So I keep a list of the top books that I like. If you want to, send me an email. You can go to I have a little site, brianwatson.us, or you can, with all the different things that you can get to for the education fund, et cetera. Just send me an email and I can send you that list. But some of them are, books like Speed of Trust. I don't know if you've ever read that book. Phenomenal book. I'm a big believer in reading a lot of biographies, so Shackleton's book and others have been very influential on my life. Um, Read a lot of different Tony Robbins and those kind of stuff, but in terms of real kind of monumental change, life changers, I can send you that list that I have. And that's one of my favorite things to do, if you ever go to someone's home, is look at their bookshelf. You can tell a lot about a person by their bookshelf. And I encourage each of you to continue that lifelong journey and do books on, your phone or whatever it might be. It's pretty powerful. I'm learning Spanish right now on my phone, doing Duolingo, because it's fun, I'm not even on a plane. I might as well be productive, at the end of the day. So. Anyone else? Well, I got to catch a flight to New York, so again, thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it.